Why don't we start? That's Phil Chen. He was at the end of the film. This is George Wu. I'm Lorene. One of the original strikers also. And she was interviewed for a book that's on sale over there by Asian American Studies. It's called Moving Mountains. So there was an interview. She was also a striker here. And then, of course, that's Harry. Okay, let's give Harry a big warm applause. I think what we're trying to do with this piece of it is to align this film along with also the time the Asian American Studies gave birth to itself. And here are some of the students, including myself, that went on strike. And I think for many of us, it affected us for the rest of our lives, okay? And I think the first thing is that I would like to ask Harry, in terms of making this film, why did you think the activist piece was an important piece in the film?
Well, that's when Chinatown became transformed. Our family had begun living in Chinatown in the late 1800s. So, we were several generations along. But nothing ever changed. Nothing ever changed until our generation came into being, because we didn't have to be afraid of, being deported because we were naturalized citizens. So it was important for people to be reminded that, things can change and you can't get over the fear. And as we were making this film, we began to realize the political climate that we're living in today. So that you could begin to make the connections. And we thought that that was an important part, probably the most important piece of the film.
Thank you. And Irene was also a participant of the strike. Irene was born in Huiping in China. She came here in 1953. She went to the public schools around Chinatown. She was raised in Chinatown. And I'd like her to actually talk about, because after the strike, she was key to a group of students that was part of what we call the San Francisco State Chinese American Planning Group. And her husband, Malcolm Collier, who's also in the audience, was also in the strike. And they were students who actually did a lot for, quote unquote, the establishment of the studies. Irene, would you like to talk about it?
All right. When I first set foot on the state campus in 1966, I felt that I could suddenly breathe. There was a lawn, and there were flowers growing along each walkway. I had grown up in Chinatown, where not a single blade of grass grew. The flowers, the cool fog, the smell of cut grass was suddenly a part of my life. I looked forward to my classes, but it was too good to be true. The professor in my literature class berated the Asian students for not participating in class discussions, just as my high school teachers did at Galileo High School. The professor in my immigrant history class only talked about the Jewish, Italian, and Irish immigrants. When my friend Gail Au asked the professor, well, what about the Chinese? He dismissed it by saying that we were, quote, statistically irrelevant, unquote, at 3% of the population. I was so disappointed in my classes. When the student strike was called, I felt the need to participate. I saw the change in Chinatown. It was overcrowded. Young people were angry, and the schools were baffled. There were no social services. There were only a few Chinese police officers. There were no Chinese firefighters. There were no Muni bus drivers of Chinese descent, no Chinese politicians, and only a handful of Chinese teachers. The immigrants that I tutored were like me. Their mothers were seamstresses. Some lived in residential hotels that had no kitchens, no bathing facilities, and only one toilet per floor, as was shown in Harry's film. I wanted Asian American Studies, which would develop teachers, counselors, social workers, healthcare professionals, and recreation directors who would provide desperately needed services for the community. After the strike, I took my first Chinese American history class from Phil Choi, and suddenly everything made sense to me. I understood suddenly why my father was so angry when he talked about the mo'o, the wooden houses. And I realized that those were the houses, the barracks of Angel Island, where he was incarcerated as a young boy. These classes were answers to questions I did not know I had. These classes unlocked the secrets that were hidden in my being. It was a Pandora's box that I was afraid to open until I got into the college and into the ethnic studies classes. I and several students were involved in the planning group, which would have input into classes, teachers, and course content. As dramatic as the strike was, it was this experience much later which showed me how important it was to pay attention to details when we are developing programs. And it is the attention to these details that would contribute to the success or failure of an idea. For instance, it was not enough to advocate for more ethnic literature in the San Francisco Unified School District. That is an appropriate goal, but it is not enough. And over the years, the Association of Chinese Teachers, a nonprofit San Francisco group that I worked with, has met with school superintendents, school board members, schools, and committee heads. When we have confronted the makers of recommended reading lists, the excuse is that there are not enough good Asian American books, but that is not true. There are plenty of excellent titles. We have developed reading lists, held workshops, and created curriculum. Yet the beast that is public education is a shapeshifter, changing heads and players every year. So much needs to be done, and it is always a work in progress. And today, we have some of the executive board members of the Association of Chinese Teachers here tonight. Would you just raise your hand over there? Thank you. And for me, the strike is not over. The poverty that drove many of us to support the strike still exists. Students still live in residential hotels, and families are still struggling more than ever to get adequate food, sanitation, and shelter. We still need teachers. We still need counselors. We still need social workers. The hostility toward immigrants runs from our president on down, and sadly even from our members of our own communities. Their stereotypes that affected us then still pop up now. We still need you to join the strike. You do not need to carry a picket sign. You do not need to boycott classes, but you do need to pull out your checkbook. You need to pull out your phone to donate to social service agencies and political candidates. You must read a newspaper, not just the articles that have been curated for you online, but read the breadth and scope of city and world news. You can talk to friends who work in social service professions to find out what is not covered in the news. The strike is not over. Lastly, to the students in the audience, if you have not decided on a career, please consider becoming a teacher. I'm sorry I had to write this in advance, but I knew, it's the teacher in me. I have to be prepared. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Amen. Thank you, Irene. It's not over. This is George Wu. George also came here from Hong Kong when he was 16. He attended public schools here, went to City College, was in the Navy for 4 years, and then actually he was one of the first group of students admitted by EOP, which was a strike settlement, to come to San Francisco State, and he came here and completed his BA. But what's really important, George became a professor in Asian American Studies. He was our chair in Asian American Studies for 10 years, and he is key in terms of how Asian American studies and ethnic studies institutionalized itself, mainly through general education courses. I mean, he was the visionary in that. So George, our question to you before they ask question is, what was it like for you to be quote unquote kind of the leader, of a department during the early days of Asian American studies?
I never see myself as a leader. It's just It's all right. You hear me now?
Yeah.
Well, I never see myself as a leader. It's just that I come back to school. Mainly is that my unemployment right now, I have to find some way to make a living, and I found that I can get GI Bill. And also, at that time, was in love with my wife, who's a student in San Francisco State. So everything is incidental. I really believe that I'm just doing my part. And I think the reason I may be a little bit more advanced is because I generally was older than the rest of you people.
Okay, that helps.
And I've been working outside, so I bring so-called the street savvy into the university. And the eggheads didn't know how to deal with me, and so we won. That's it.
What were the main, in terms of being the chair at that time that you were a chair, what was some or one or two major hurdles that you saw the college have to go through and the department?
Well, basically, chair of a department, the administration like to see you as their lackey. So they want you to control that faculty, control your department, make sure they don't make noise. So we just play with them a little bit. And I see myself as a shop steward, as a union leader for the worker, which is our faculty. So we do our thing. And the most obstacle is that we don't work hard enough, really. People come into university to teach, and they see it as an easy job. You teach 12 units, you got your money, and you want to leave. So we do one thing very unusual. We have a meeting every week, Friday at 4 o'clock on campus. That's going for years, and this has shocked the rest of the faculty, and they know we are for real. So the faculty actually contributed, and the community people who support the study contributed. It's really a group effort, and to be the chair is simply to take care of the paperwork, so to speak.
Yes, and to give them help when they need to have it, I think.
Well, I don't know why now. After I retired in 2001, and since then, many people started telling me things I didn't realize. They say a lot of the professors on campus was afraid of me. And I took great advantage of that. Because they view me as a gang leader at that time.
Yes.
Okay, which is
That's right.
fine with me.
I got him to say it. Thank you. They were scared of him. Okay, last but not least is Phil Chen. He was also a student and a participant in the strike. I think Phil had an interesting story in terms of, being the new student in the department and the structure of the department at that time that actually solidifies much of his avocation for most of his life after San Francisco State. Could you remind them what that was? Because I don't think the current faculty have ever heard of it.
When I was at State and the strike got underway, first of all, I didn't have the fire that Lorene had. I didn't have the dedication that Irene had. And I got pulled into it by a friend. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have participated. But along the way, especially when the planning group started meeting and the discussion was over the 9-unit block, it suddenly, connected with me. And what the 9-unit block was a way to give credits to students, but to require them to work in the community for 15 to 20 hours a week. And that was a way that got me connected with people like Alice Barkley and Dick Barkley, and of course with George, people that I probably would have been very intimidated by. And working with them, I learned a lot. And working with Alice Barkley also got me involved with Harry with the Mailunion Project. And, you know, Gordon Chin, who was fairly prominent in the film, who was the founder of the Chinatown Community Development Center, used to come by to visit me because we were roommates and friends. And I talked him into joining the Chinatown Coalition for Better Housing. And instead of worrying about gang kids, he ultimately got into housing and land use development. So we learned a lot working with Harry and with Linda. And out of that experience, we felt that it was important to continue that work. And that work ultimately resulted in the forming of the Chinatown Community Development Center, which Gordon chronicled in this book. It's called Building Community Chinatown Style. And you all should read this book. I think that starting that was kind of a response to how long it took to build the Mailunion Project. It took 10 years to do that. And we had, you know, I had the chance to go to Washington, D.C. and come back, and it was still not done, okay? I mean, that's kind of gives you an idea of how long, you know, how slowly that project went. I have to say that Gordon and his staff should really be commended for the work that they've done in the last 43 years, where they've been able to acquire and build over 2,800 units of housing, which is really providing housing for nearly 5,000 people at rents that are unheard of in today's housing market. So again, all of this, I think, really got a kickstart from that 9-unit block. And I hope that at some point, you know, SF State will bring back that program or expand that program and get more of the students involved in the community. Without a direct connection with the community, any kind of Asian American studies program is purely academic.
Yes.
So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. I want to thank you, Phil. I wanted to also acknowledge, is Jeannie Dare and Connie still here? Yes, they were also part of the Chinese American planning group, you know, during the early days of this aftermath of the strike. I think what's key for all of us here that are sitting here is that of course, that was the 60s was the convergence of many movements, but the Asian American studies, in terms of it blossoming and becoming what it was in the beginning, was very strongly tied to the community and affected all our lives in terms of our professions. And even after retirement, we're not exactly done. And it's like Irene says, this is never done. So with that said, we'd like to hear from you in terms of your questions for us, if you have any. No? Yes? No? Oh, there's one. Way back there.
Hi, my name is Carrie Marr. My dad was in the film, and I'm a high school teacher. And I think one question that I have for you all, and I don't want to generalize about the young people that I work with because they're amazing, and they're doing a lot of important work, but I do notice that among Asian American teens today, particularly Chinese American teens, I'm seeing less of the kind of solidarity and third world affinity and learning from Black folks and all of that than there was perhaps in your generation. And I'm wondering how you talk to young people or your students today about the importance of Chinese American, Asian American solidarity with affirmative action and all people of color struggles.
I'd like to answer that. First of all, I think that at the high school level, we see that many of our African American and Latino students are much more open to issues like affirmative action and identity and searching for themselves. And it always seems to me that teachers are always saying that Asian American students are reluctant to accept that and to embrace that. And part of it is, from my own experiences, the gap between home language, and immigration, it is so strong, it is so different, that unless it is part of the school curriculum, and unless it's part of an acceptance of the school curriculum, you are not going to get your students to talk. And I know that from personal experience. I could not talk. I wanted to speak, but I never could speak. And for Asian American students, I think it happens much later than for African American and Latino students. It often does not happen until college, when you're suddenly set free and you're exposed to ideas in a much freer environment that we are able to let loose. So I think what we really want to do is still continue to press the issue, but know that for Asian American students, sometimes it doesn't happen until a little bit later.
Another question?
What do you think about the similarities of the current problems of the protesters from the higher educations of the night, what was it, 50 years ago, and now, especially Hong Kong protests that I've been talking about. I mean, I brought it up a little bit.
George?
Well, I'm from Hong Kong. I was born in Hong Kong, and I remember how Hong Kong was under British rule. I personally do not understand what kind of freedom people are talking about they don't have right now in Hong Kong. When we would go on strike in the San Francisco Steaks strike, the issue was very clear that we want to bring the education system open up to our community, to our people. And we want the curriculum to change so that our experience are manifested in it. And right now, the issue in Hong Kong, to me, is fake issue. The issue is not what you see. Even you solve all the 5 demands, they will still raise hell. Basically, people feel hopeless in that situation because of economic reason. They live in very poor housing. The housing in San Francisco is not nearly as expensive as Hong Kong. Hong Kong is the most expensive city in the world. People live in few square feet, worse than the Chinatown rooming house. When you are a Hong Kong person right now, unless you have money, you look at your future, you see no future, and that's why they're raising hell. So, personally, I support any kind of hell raising, but I do not understand what the issue is that they're raising about. Because if you want a revolution, you got to do it quietly because the time is not right for them to do it. And I don't understand why they go around to American Council and ask for help, going to the British Council and ask for help. And I remember when I was a child, I was taught how the Western nation humiliated the Chinese, how they divided land from us, how they prevented us to advance in the world. And today, seems to me they're retreating a little bit from calling for Hong Kong independent. But personally, I don't think Hong Kong issue is going to be solved. I don't see how they're going to get out that the way that they are, with or without mainland China's intervention.
Is that Grace?
This doesn't work out. Hi, I'm Grace Yu. Thank you so much for all of our elders that have been part of the Third World Strike. We are so appreciative of all of the work that you've been doing. I actually had a question for the filmmaker, Harry, and I've been teaching Asian American history, and we always like to focus on the wins, but I so appreciated your film because you also talked about losses. I had no idea about Barry Fong Torres, the story of Barry Fong Torres, and that was told. Also, the names of folks that were killed during the Golden Dragon Massacre, I so appreciated that. And it was almost sort of like there were so many stories that I was like, I wanted a sequel in terms of, I wanted to know what happened to those families that were impacted by gang violence. And that one, of you at Colma at the memorial, I was so moved by all of those images. And for you to speak of the losses, it really moved me. And made me realize that we need to also we always talk about the wins, but we also need to talk about the losses as well. And you put names to those losses as well, and I appreciated that.
Thank you. I'll just give you a short response. This is my first and last film.
No.
But my son had a lot to do with completing this film. I was so old school that I was looking at film, and he was looking at digitized images and just, creating miracles with his computer. And we do have a lot of footage that we didn't use. As by way of a confession, we had not anticipated completing this film until the end of this year. But back in March, we were asked to submit that film to a film fest, which really cut our time short. So the feedback we appreciate, because we have a lot more editing to do with this film. And future film will be short films that we hope could be utilized in the classrooms, with an emphasis on certain themes. And so, we're very open to suggestions, and please feel free to go to CHINATOWNrising.com and leave us your feedback there.
Harry, I have a request for Harry. I'd like to see a 45-minute film with concentration on the Mei issue so that people can use it in housing, because that issue itself manifests a lot of the problems and solutions, and also point out what people did at that time for Chinatown. So if you can't do it, at least get George to do it.
Okay. Well, I think that wraps it up for tonight, but before you leave, I'm supposed to make a couple of announcements. They're selling books, that's one. They're selling snacks to raise money for our students in AAS. And last but not least, there's free birthday cake. So thank you everyone for coming tonight. We appreciate it, and long live College of Ethnic Studies. Thank you.